Building websites is a breeze with the framework as you please, easy as slicing cheese with the tools such as these. Structured pages quick, no CSS to make you sick. Use the layout that you pick, navigation helps you click. Icons, buttons, you can tap your containers, close the gap. Responsive gridding is a snap. You'll be launching off the map, blasting off with Bootstrap, blasting off with Bootstrap.
Hey everybody, welcome to Blasting Off with Bootstrap. I'm Adam Fortuna, and in this first level, we're going to be looking at some of the capabilities of Bootstrap, how to add Bootstrap to our site, and a few basic classes. Let's get started. So let's say you want to build a website. Knowing how to combine structure, style, and behavior is necessary to get an attractive and useful site up and running. If you have a basic understanding of websites, you know that HTML is what provides our page structure. Next, CSS will provide our page with some styling for our elements. Then JavaScript comes in and provides our page with some much needed behavior. Standard website development follows some typical patterns. We'll start by adding our HTML file, and that's where we'll be adding the structure of our page. That page styling we talked about, that'll go in this CSS file. And lastly, our page behavior, that'll be added to a JavaScript file. So once we have the structure set in our HTML file, we can jump over and style it in our CSS file. As we add more structure to our HTML file, we might realize we need to add some behavior and jump over to our JavaScript file. We might then jump back to our HTML file and continue building our page. All this movement between files shows just how much work a good website can require. One of the things that can help us with this process is a framework. So what exactly is a framework? Well, it's a set of tools that can help assist us in building our website. So what is the most popular framework for styling and organizing our website? Well, Bootstrap. So what can Bootstrap do for us? Well, it can help us by letting us skip writing our CSS and JavaScript and let us focus primarily on our HTML and the structure of our site. Instead of having our own CSS and JavaScript files, we're going to use Bootstrap's files instead. These will provide some page styling and behavior for our app without us having to do anything. Well, that's pretty cool, right? You might be wondering who's using Bootstrap. Well, like we said, Bootstrap is the most popular HTML and CSS framework, so there's a lot of sites using it. One that you might have heard of is Lyft, a company disrupting the taxi industry. Although they modify it heavily, they use Bootstrap on their page to provide the structure you see here. Another site using Bootstrap is Meteor, a JavaScript framework. Much of the site is using Bootstrap, including this navigation bar at the top and the grid system used to control how the page is structured. Bootstrap isn't just for startups though. Apple's Maps Connect page, which is used by businesses to manage their Google Maps presence, is also using the framework, showing just how useful it can be. Let's take a look at what we'll be building in this course. The Intergalactic Transit Authority is responsible for taking its passengers into space and has a few options available for travelers. We're going to be creating a web page using Bootstrap just for them. At the end of the course, you'll know how every element on this page works, and a couple more too. This includes things like this navigation bar here at the top, with a drop-down for additional links which will be handy on any site you build. Bootstrap is also great for designing responsive websites. Those are ones that will respond great in many different page resolutions. This lets us write one code base that works well on a desktop, a tablet, or a phone with minimal added work required. So how do we start building this beautiful page? Well, to start off, we need to get a hold of the Bootstrap framework. To do that, we can head over to the Bootstrap website and download the Bootstrap library. In this case, we're going to be checking out this version of Bootstrap, which contains the JavaScript and CSS files we'll need. If you already know Less or Sass, you can give one of these other versions a shot too. So once you download the Bootstrap framework and unzip it, you'll see this dist folder. So let's take a look at what's inside of that. This folder contains the entire Bootstrap framework. To start off, let's check out what's inside the CSS folder. There's a bunch of files in the CSS folder, but the two that we'll be using are the bootstrap.css file and the bootstrap.min.css file. These two are functionally the same, and they will both save us from needing to write a bunch of CSS, but the .min version is recommended for production use because it is a little smaller. Alright, so what's in the fonts folder? Well, there's a couple of these Glyphicon halfling regular files, and Bootstrap provides a font that can be used as icons that we'll go over a little bit more in level 3. The last folder in here is the JS folder, and that contains some of the Bootstrap JavaScript files that will add behavior to our site. To start out, we're going to create an index.html file inside of that dist folder. In this file, we'll start off by adding some of the usual things you'll see in any HTML file. We'll add our doc type and an HTML tag with our head and title tag, same as any page. To follow that up, we're going to start by adding some sample content on our page. We'll begin by adding a lot of our headers. So we'll start by adding some sample h1 tags, h2 and h3 tags. Next, we'll add in some paragraph tags to describe each of our headings. To finish things off, our page needs some kind of call to action. So we're going to add a couple of buttons for our users to engage with under our h2 in its paragraph. If we open up our page right now in a browser, it's going to look a little like this. Not exactly the best. All of these styles are being applied by the browser itself because we haven't provided any kind of styling definition for this page. Let's see how we can add Bootstrap to it to improve the look and feel of it. So let's bring our page back in here. In order to add Bootstrap to it, we're going to need to add a couple of additional tags to it. The first tag that we need to add is the link tag. That'll be up here in the head, and it'll reference this css/bootstrap.css file. Remember how this index.html file is in our dist folder? Well, that css/bootstrap.css file is a relative path to our index.html file. By just adding this link tag, we're set on the styling of our web page for now. But to add some behavior, we'll need to add some JavaScript to our page. Turns out, the Bootstrap framework depends on the jQuery framework and is needed to do a bunch of cool things. We'll add a script tag to the jQuery library at the bottom here. Now that we have jQuery in there, we can add another script tag to load in the Bootstrap JavaScript library. We'll explore this one a little more later. Here's our initial website without using Bootstrap. Let's see what it can look like once we add Bootstrap to the page. So far, not too hugely different. The font's changed a little bit and the buttons are styled, but there's still a lot more we can do to improve the look and feel of it. One of the ways we can visually improve our site is by centering our content elements and creating a pair of side margins. This will prevent our content from wrapping to the very edges of our page. To do that, we're going to use Bootstrap's container class. The container class will responsively add some margins and kind of center our content, but what do we add the container class to? So in this case, we're going to wrap all of that content in a div, and we want that div to responsively add margins and center our content. In order to do that, we can add a class of container, which will create that fixed width element that we really need that will respond to the current size of the browser. So now that we've added this container class, let's check out what it looks like in the browser. You'll notice that just by wrapping our page in a div and adding a container class, our page now doesn't take up the entire width of the browser window. Instead, it's confined within these two invisible margins. Also, you can see that the text within our div wasn't centered. The only thing that was centered in this case was our entire container element, this div, which has these invisible margins on both sides of it. Checking out what we've got so far, we can see that if we drag the edge of our browser window, we see that the margins will periodically reset when the width of the window crosses some small, medium, or large boundary lines, but we'll discuss that a bit more later. Eventually, we see that the margins become very small at the smallest window size, and then content begins to fully wrap. Then we drag it back again. The margins snap back into place when we cross the size boundaries. The margins will continue to grow within each window size to keep the content centered within the padding for us. So what if you have some content on your page that you want to stretch completely across it? You don't want it to be confined to a container. You might think you can just leave it out of a container and it'll work, but it might run up against the very, very edges of your page. To get around that, we can wrap our content in a container fluid class. That'll add a little bit of padding within that element, but still allow the div to stretch the entire width of the page. So let's take a look at our page again. What if we wanted all of these H3 elements to stretch across the entire page? We would no longer be able to include them within our container element. Instead, we need to create a new div and give it a class of container fluid and move all of our H3s into it. Now, this div will take up the entire page, while our container will be centered in the middle. If we take a look at our responsive site here, we'll drag the edge of the window and watch the top H1 and H2 portions start to get some margins and move towards the center because they are in a standard container. While the H3 portions that we wrapped in a container fluid, well, those guys will grow with the page, which causes the text in those elements to experience a constant wrapping and unwrapping as the width of the window changes. That's it for level 1. Time for you to see what you've learned about Bootstrap in the challenges. We'll see you back in level 2.
I like that. Don't say couple though, say a few.
A few?
Couple's 2, right?
I
I don't want to mess them up.
define a couple as more than 2. I mean,
Couple?
a pair is 2.
So it's a couple.
A couple is a few.
No.